The German plan for a British corps in the Waffen-SS was not as unusual as it sounds. Despite their image as the elite of German military might, the SS was also an international force, recruiting Scandinavians, French, Bosnian Muslims, and 2,000 Indian troops as well. Now they were determined to add a British force to their ranks. At a high-level SS meeting in Berlin, the new unit was named the British Free Corps. Recruiting would start immediately among the thousands of British and Commonwealth POWs in the Stalags. But life for those prisoners was harsh and humiliating. They were hardly likely to join forces with an enemy that was treating them so badly. Richard Wilson was captured in a battle at Dunkirk, which wiped out most of his comrades. He endured 5 years of German captivity in grim conditions and with poor food.
The first place we were at, we got 3 Polish biscuits a day. They were rather big biscuits, like double-sided dog biscuits. And we went from there to Fort 8, where for a few days there was nothing. And then when the food turned up, it was, well, I suppose a pig would think it wasn't too bad. It was bloody awful.
So how were the Germans to persuade such unlikely recruits to come over to their side? Their answer, a clever public relations exercise. In a suburb of Berlin called Genshagen, they set up a holiday camp especially for British POWs. They hoped that well-fed, well-treated prisoners would be much more easily persuaded to join the Nazi cause.
Well, this is the site of Special Detachment 999, just outside the village of Genshagen, which is one of the southern suburbs of Berlin. Now here, the Germans built a holiday camp for British prisoners of war. They laid out a football pitch, but they couldn't use that very often because they had to dig air raid trenches in it. There was a camp theatre, there was a cafe where they could buy Red Cross goods and stuff imported from Switzerland. So it was much more comfortable than the conditions that they were used to.
And there were other treats too. These smiling prisoners enjoyed free beer, trips out to Berlin. They even had their own concert band. It was all designed to make them better disposed to Germany. But many prisoners were extremely suspicious of such temptations.
The rumour went round, or the Germans quietly pushed it around, that, you know, you poor chaps have been prisoners of war, it must have been hard. Why not have a little bit more comfort and come to Berlin and we'll look after you, you know, theatres and this and that and grub and loose women, all that sort of stuff. It doesn't matter what anybody's relations with the Germans were, anybody else's, I was on the other side.
Richard Wilson's suspicions were well-founded. Right from the start, the Germans had secretly planted in the Genshagen holiday camp a group of British Nazi sympathisers, stool pigeons, whose job was to persuade their own countrymen to change sides. Running the camp for the Germans was Quartermaster Sergeant John Brown. Chosen for his known fascist sympathies, he seemed to be an active collaborator. He used his position to set up a black market operation in Red Cross food parcels. Another member of the secret recruiting team was Frank Wood, real name Francis McClardy, a Liverpudlian fascist. He volunteered for the SS off his own bat. But the most sinister stool pigeon was a Londoner, Thomas Cooper. He'd already fought for Hitler on the Eastern Front and was the only British subject to receive a German war medal as a serving Nazi soldier.
He'd been a concentration camp guard. He'd been a member of Hitler's bodyguard unit, the Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, and a very, very sinister, unpleasant character. Once they'd identified a potential recruit, then they'd take him to one side. They'd show him posters, they'd show him pamphlets, pictures of supposed British SS soldiers fighting against the Russians. And this was all designed to make a prisoner think that he was joining a big, successful movement.
One prisoner the recruiters especially targeted was physical fitness instructor Eric Pleasance. A former British fascist, Pleasance died in 1997, but he recorded this video, never seen before, after suffering a stroke.
And he told us that we're only going to fight communism and that kind of thing, and we would not have been asked to fight any Englishman or any other thing except the Eastern Front.
The prisoners were being urged to join a European crusade against Russian communism led by Germany. But as well as the glowing propaganda picture, the prisoners also saw the brutal reality of the Nazi regime.
Right next door to the holiday camp, where British prisoners are enjoying themselves, drinking beer, eating a lot of food, we've got the site of the Grossbeeren slave labour camp, where political prisoners, Jews and anti-fascists were literally worked to death by the Germans. And this was in full view of the British prisoners. There was no question that they were trying to hide it or anything like that. So on the one hand, you saw the Germans attempting to show how civilized they were, and right next door to it you have, you know, the classic symbol of Nazi barbarity, the concentration camp.
At the Grossbeeren concentration camp, slave labourers from Russia and occupied Europe were worked to death or murdered. Their mass grave is now a memorial to Nazi brutality. But as well as siting their holiday camp next door to a slave labour centre, the Nazis had made an even bigger mistake. John Brown, the man they'd chosen as their chief stool pigeon, was all the time a double agent. Although he'd been a leading fascist before the war, he was also a committed patriot, working for British intelligence. He sent coded messages back to MI5 with full details of the German plans for a British SS unit. And he successfully sabotaged their recruiting efforts.
The crass flaw in the Germans' planning was that the man that they thought was working for them was working for the other side.
Furious at the failure of the holiday camp, the Germans now tried a more direct approach.
Having tried the carrot, holidays at Genshagen, for POWs who were cooperative, now it was time for the stick. They were stripped of all their clothing, they weren't fed properly, they were given very little water, they were kept in cold cells, they were shouted at. The choice that they were offered was more of this treatment. This is what the rest of your captivity is going to be like, naked on bread and water in a cell. Or join the British Free Corps, fight the Russians, be treated as a decent, honourable soldier.
The duty of prisoners of war was to resist interrogation, and most, like Richard Wilson, did.
A pistol by its barrel swishing past your nose and around your head, and a pistol held by the hand, sort of in your ear nearly, and that sort of stuff. They were doing that the whole time. If a bloke was in trouble and they thought he would bend, they bent him.
But the first person the Germans targeted, a captured commando called John Eric Wilson, broke after 3 days of ill treatment.